Chapter, 8th chapter, and it's a recapitulation of the entire teaching, and we're doing it through the lens of the three gunas: sattva, rajas, and tamas. Tamas is inactivity, lethargy, delusion, illusion, misunderstanding. Rajas is activity, where our strivings, our ambitions, where our jealousy, envy, competitiveness, all that stuff occurs in Rajas. The non-activity, sattva, where I identify as the still point. Watch the play of the world. We just finished buddhi, here meaning understanding or knowledge, three kinds of understanding. So what verse are we on this evening?
We're on 30.
And what page?
Page is
Doesn't matter. Do you have it deep?
779.
Yeah.
All right. So will you help us out, please?
Pravrittim cha nivrittim cha karya karye bhaya bhaye bandham moksham cha ya vitti buddhi sa partha sattviki. That which knows the paths of work and renunciation, that ought to be done and what not to be done. My apologies. That which knows the paths of work and renunciation, what ought to be done and what ought not to be done. Fear and fearlessness, bondage and liberation, that understanding is sattvic or pure, O Partha.
Yes, so here's our pure understanding, people who have a clear insight into life. Remember, Krishna has said that this knowledge gives us mastery over this world and the beyond. So Gita revolutionizes yoga. Prior to that, many people thought that, okay, you could be a ritualist, you could do your puja, your yajna, you could be a grahastha householder, stuff like that. But if you want to be a yogi and gain self-realization, leave the world, become a sannyasi. And Swamiji used to say, Gita is for the man of knowledge downtown. It's all put in the framework of him being a soldier, being a general. But that's a metaphor for those of us who aspire to self-realization, and our karma is such that we work in. So when we know what we should do, what we shouldn't do, start off as a yogi, knowing the bases of an ethical life. Again, one of my favorite frameworks for this is the yamas and niyamas from Raja Yoga. That gives us a whole lot to work on. So what we should do, what we shouldn't do. The deeper understanding of this, though, is the self never acts. The equipment does the action. It is guna and karma that is the doer. First idea was what needs to be done, what shouldn't be done. What was the next idea?
That which knows the path of work and renunciation, what ought to be done and what ought not to be done. Fear and fearlessness.
Okay, so fear and fearlessness. What is fear? Well, the root of most of our fear is I'm not okay. I need to protect or defend self. I'm either not going to get what I want in order to make me happy, or I'm going to lose what I think is making me happy. Something out there threatens my welfare, my well-being. That's our fear. And what yoga says is our fear is false evidence appearing real. F-E-A-R. Why? Because what I'm worried about is myself. I'm not going to be okay. I'm not going to be happy. I'm threatened in some way. And the self, myself, yourself, is like space. Yoga Vasishtha tells the story about the fellow who was very worried about space. He wanted to protect space. So he builds a house to protect space. In time, the house falls down. He does not grieve the loss of the house. He grieves the loss of space. So then he digs a well in order to protect space. And in time, the well caves in. He doesn't grieve the loss of the container. He grieves the loss of space. It's stupid. You can't do anything to space. Likewise, nothing is going to harm you. Nothing is going to diminish you. Nothing is ever going to improve you either. So rather than false evidence appearing real, face everything and realize it's all going to be okay. So the person of the Sattvic Buddhi understands there's nothing to be afraid. Next idea, or is that all of it?
Bondage and liberation.
What is bondage? What is liberation? Listen very carefully. Many people misunderstand this. The self doesn't get bound. The self doesn't get liberated. Your self is already free. Where's the problem? In my mind. There is no other bondage than the deeply rooted conviction in my mind that I'm bound. Meaning, because of spiritual ignorance, I think I'm the body. There is no other liberation than the deeply rooted conviction in the mind, technically the subtle intellect, based on direct experience. Not that I'm a Mahatma, but I am Brahman. Chidananda Rupaham Shivoham Shivoham. And neither mind state affects the self. yet nothing new. Philosophically, we say it is not an ontological problem. Ontology is the study of being in philosophy. There's nothing wrong with my being. It is an epistemological problem. It's a problem of knowing. I think I'm something other than what I really am. Any thoughts on this? Is that all the pieces of this verse?
That understanding is sattvic.
Yes, this is the sattvic understanding. Next one. Oh, we've done these before. Maybe not.
Yaya dharmam adharmam cha karyam cha karyameva cha ayathavat prajanati buddhi sa partha rajasi. That by which one wrongly understands dharma and adharma, and also what ought to be done and what ought not to be done. That intellectual understanding of Partha is Rajasic or passionate.
Yes. So for those of us who have a misunderstanding, here's a very important point. We tend to understand scripture through the filter of our own minds. This is one of the reasons why the suggestion is you study scripture with a guru who can tell you, well, that's nonsense. That's not what it means at all. So what are the kinds of Rajasic misunderstandings? So in the scriptures, we talk about how the entire creation comes about by means of sankalpa. And we as human beings, to a greater degree than we think, reenact the creative process. As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he, as the Christian scripture says. You can take this teaching and you can twist it into what the New Agey people do, and we get all into manifesting. Visualize the Cadillac, because I want a Cadillac. Visualize this, I want that. Never deals with the underlying issue, the belief that getting what I want will make me happy, which is not true. Your self-nature, the mind abiding in the self, will make it. But you can take the teaching and you can bend it. For a conversation I had with a student, she was all sobbing and stuff like that, and she had another broken love affair, and she'd been out, drinking with all her friends all weekend and stuff like that, and partying. And she says, well, I'm getting into Tantra. She said, I thought Tantra is where you could have your cake and eat it too. You can enjoy the world and still have self-realization. I said, oh, that's a misunderstanding of Tantra. Both Tantra and Vedanta culminate in Vairagya. Let's see if I can give you a worldly example. In the 12-step traditions, we say nobody gets sober until they hit bottom. The beginning, when you're drinking and using, it's fun. And it's fun with problems. It's just problems. when you get sick and tired of being sick and tired, and your life has just turned to ashes, then we develop the desire to stop using and drinking. How do we get there? We get beaten into reasonableness by the world. Did that make sense? The Jnana yogis, they look at the fellow who's the crack addict and they go, I don't think I want to go down that path. That's called insight. That's the basic difference between the two. The tantrikas dive into the world. I tell you, it's the more painful path. It's the more painful path where you get beaten into reasonableness. Who here is gone through a phase of life where you've been lonely and disappointed by a romantic involvement? How's that working out for you? And the more you, I'm so lonely, I want somebody. How's that feel? Sannyasi. Thank you, God. I don't have that anymore. But both paths meet in Vairagya. But if we have a Rajasic understanding, we'll have all sorts of funny ideas. Or those, here's one that's very popular now. Somehow I'm going to find God through the body. I just get enough massages. Go to Harbin Hot Springs in the mud bath. I'm taking care of myself. This is self-love. Nothing wrong with that. We'll not find freedom that way. Or I was talking with someone, a couple people this week, what I call the double samsara of drugs. Take a psychedelic. Oh, I'm having a spiritual experience. Knock yourself out. I call it a double samsara because the drug experience is an illusion about this world. This world is an illusion about ultimate reality. Those are Rajasic understandings. Any thoughts? I can keep listing all of them, where we take kind of a piece of the teaching and we work it in a way that just satisfies our materialistic desires. All right, next verse.
Actually, I have a question.
Who's
Jimmy.
that?
It's Sophie on Zoom.
Hi, Sophie.
Hi, Jimmy. Sorry, I haven't been able to come because it's far from me, but I'm here on Zoom. And
All right. What's your question?
My question is that I have been reading and experimenting with being present inside your body and just experiencing whatever feelings come up and just accepting them. Is that something that you would also think it's the most painful path? Is it a way to develop just being present in the moment?
No, you should always be present in the moment. That's a sattvic practice.
Yeah.
Present to what's going on in your body, present what's going on in your emotions.
Okay.
You will not find freedom by running away It's not about avoidance. Yoga is never about the avoidance of the uncomfortable.
Okay, just because before you said that it's very popular now to have these embodiment practices, so I was just checking whether the practices that I've been doing.
Fine, that's fine.
Okay, cool, thank you.
Going on. Who did we miss?
Oh, I think Santosh went to that.
Gotcha. All right.
Adharmam dharmamitiya manyate tamasavrita sarvarthan viparitashyam buddhi sa partha tamasi. That which, enveloped in darkness, sees adharma as dharma, and all things perverted, that intellect or understanding is tamasic or partha.
Yes. So probably our classic example of adharmic understanding, tamasic understanding, we could say is people who practice black magic. So and so hurt my feelings, so I'm going to light black candles and call on spirits to come and hurt those people. That's tamas. Not understanding that everything you put out is going to come back to you. The basic understanding of the three gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas, our suffering happens largely in the Rajasic mind. People who think the way to deal with my restlessness, my irritability, my discomfort, my loneliness, my despair, is to fix it by going unconscious. Let me drink. Let me do drugs. Let me zone out on Netflix. Let me gamble. Let me get lost in anything that gets me away from what is. That's tamasic understanding. Problem is, when you, then what do a lot of people who have very bad depression want to do all the time? Sleep. It's an avoidance. It's going from rajas into tamas. I was talking with a person who's in very early recovery from alcoholism. And she was feeling so much better physically because she's finally detoxed a bit from the alcohol. But now all of a sudden she's a mess emotionally. And she thinks, I felt better with all the vodka all day long. Or she was having severe health issues. And I say, yeah, that's what's going to happen. You're going to feel better. You're going to feel everything better. That's what happens. Because in the tamasic state, we have pressed down and buried all those feelings. Many of you who started therapeutic environments of all kinds, it could be psychotherapy, and all of a sudden stuff from your family of origin is coming up. And it's tough to face that stuff. It's painful. Who's gone through stuff like that? Yeah. And why does it come up when we're adults? What did we do before? Stuff it. Avoid it. Run from it. That's tamas. That's tamas. So that's a wrong and false understanding.
I have a question.
Please.
So if say irritability and depression are rajasic, and we all know how to get to the tamasic state from there, how does one move in the direction of sattvic?
Yeah, very good question. Did all you Zoomies hear her question? So this is, how do you go if you've experimented with going from Rajas to Tamas and you've seen it doesn't work? How do you go from Rajas into Sattva? That's through spiritual practice. That's essentially what we're doing, is scrubbing off the Tamas and the Rajas to get to a sattvic state. So if you are unhappy and you're restless, irritable, and discontent, depressed, shut down, resentful, your mind goes to the past, worries about the future, understand, oh, Rajasic mind state. Your ignorance will say self-soothe. Maybe if I have a glass of wine, or maybe even a bottle of wine. Maybe if I just have a little piece of cheesecake or an entire cheesecake. You know, those temptations, but it never works. So just don't do something, sit there with it. If you're sad, weep. Now, one of the things that is of value in moving the mind from tamas into rajas, suffering shared is suffering lightened. You can talk about it with a trusted friend. But then all our various yogic practices are about moving from the Rajasic mind into the sattvic mind. Viveka, Vairagya. Remember our gang of six: Shama, Dhamma, Viparati, Titiksha, Shraddha, Samadhana. Did I get them out? I think so. So those are the practices we want to engage in. Or here's one that was useful to me. Oh, I'm so lonely. I want a partner. No, Jim, you don't. You want Krishna. Those longings come up. Ego says, I want a person, place, thing, or condition. Let your understanding be what I really want is the Lord. Do what you can to turn your heart and your mind to the Lord. Now, when we were coming back from our South Indian meal that we had, that was so wonderful, down the peninsula, you had talked about your chanting guru. Now, that's a sattvic practice. Will you share a bit about what do you mind talking about it at all?
Sure, yeah. The chanting practice?
Yes, the chanting practice.
In short, my family didn't pressure me into any form of religious practices, but my family did do some amount of chanting. So I was oriented early on, but I guess I got disillusioned when I lost my father. And then many years later, my ex-husband introduced me to this chanting teacher because we were falling apart at the time. What I didn't realize then, and I do now, is that there were a lot of like knotted areas of my psyche that I feel like are now unlocking and sort of diffusing with regular practice. And oftentimes it's become my anchor to if I get into a negative spiral, or if I'm just feeling, shitty any day, the chanting helps me self-regulate, move past it quickly. And I also feel like I have fewer, I think, depressive phases. I moved on from the significant depression of the separation.
Because these mantras are powerful. They have a lot of power on the subtle plane. but it's a place to put your mind that's not about regret, not about rehashing old stories, stuff like that. So while you're chanting, let's say you're chanting Lalita Sahasranama, what do you do if, oh, that awful person, they were so mean to me? What do you do when those thoughts and feelings arise if you're doing the chanting?
I honestly just offer it to the goddess.
Yeah,
Say
sounds
this-
good to me. That's very good tapas. So these are the kinds of practices we can do. The rule of thumb in meditation and spiritual practice is the grosser the mind, the more supports we need. So you can chant when you're in a gnarly place, when the knots at the heart are tied up. You can do seva. That's always good. Almost doesn't matter what your problem is. Go help another person. That is the most painful place of the mind, is self-absorbed self-observation. How am I doing? What do they think of me? Am I okay? When I'm reviewing my miseries. Does this make sense? The attentive faculty is focused on the ego. So we want to other center that. You can focus it on other people. Focus it on the goddess. Then as the mind gets quieter, then the more subtle forms of meditation become more efficacious. But you can chant something very extensive, like we had talked about Lalita Sahasranam, Vishnu Sahasranam, Rudram Chamakam. What are some other ones? Some very, very powerful chants.
Hanuman Chalisa.
Hanuman Chalisa.
Puruಷ Suktam.
Yes, yes. There's some Ganapati ones, aren't there?
Yeah, Ganesh Pancharatnam,
Yes,
Shankaracharya.
yes. And then, if your mind gets more subtle, you can bring it down just to japa. Om Namah Shivaya. Om Namah Shivaya. Your mind becomes even more softly. Drop the mantra. Now, if you are in a pretty tamasic state, this is one of the values of the Raja Yoga tradition. You can do asana. Go take a yoga class. You can do pranayama. You can do some chanting. These are all practices that will help move the mind out of tamas and rajas into making it more fertile, more prepared. Now I'm going to absolutely contradict what I said earlier. The body and the mind are not separate. One's just a grossified form of the other. Sometimes we can get great value out of things like deep tissue body work. In the 70s, I went through rolfing. Anybody here know what rolfing is?
Heard about it. Not
It's
tried
a
it.
very, very intense deep tissue where they work on the fascia. It's very, very painful because all the traumas, all the hurts, stuff like that, they're not only in the psyche, but they're stored in the body. So it becomes a way to loosen bunch of that stuff. I think the best of all is a regular meditation practice. If your mind is still enough, if your mind is still too Rajasic, you'll find meditation very difficult. But this is different than self-soothing. And what you'll find when we do these practices, the chanting, mantra, asana, pranayama, a phenomenon called kashaya happens. Who knows what kashaya is? What?
Medicine?
No, kashaya is the vomiting up of the unconscious, the knots of the heart. So meditation, when we think of self-soothing, I feel crappy, I want to put something on top of it like a salve to make me feel better. Real spirituality is not about that. It's much more like lancing a boil. So Shaya is the vomiting up of all that stuff, what we call the Hridaya Granthi, the knots of the heart. So for example, if we can use what you and I were talking about, when you started regularly doing the chanting, did you find stuff coming up out of the unconscious?
I think, yeah, definitely. It started coming up, but what surprised me was after a couple of years, a lot of it went away.
Yes. So the knots of the heart arise out of the unconscious into our field of awareness. And if we don't try to fix it, they eventually just start to untie. That's the process that yoga invites. Very, very good question. As a rule of thumb, we move the mind from tamas into rajas, and rajas into sattva. So if you're totally triggered, totally into anger, or totally fearful or something like that, probably meditation is not going to be the most effective means. You may not be able to get quiet enough. You might have to do a more Rajasic practice. All right. You know, if you are depressed and shut down, well, take a shower, put on clean clothes, make your bed, do the dishes. See how you feel after that. Sattvic environment will do a whole lot to help keep your mind silent. Your house is a pigsty, you're going to find it harder. Stay clear. All right. Any other questions on this?
Yeah. So
Is that Brad?
Yeah, it's Brad. So you're saying if the mind is too Rajasic for meditation, then you might need another method. Would that be chanting? Or?
Chanting is a good one.
I see. Are there
Chanting is
other
a good
ones
one.
too?
Seva,
Mm-hmm.
doing service, doing selfless service. Karma yoga. Do your work, dedicating it to the Lord. I always find seva really good. I mean, I love that one. Jim, it doesn't matter what your effing problem is, go help someone else. Yeah, but what about how's that self-pity working out for you, Jim. You know? Doesn't work. Is that useful?
Yeah, very useful. Yeah. Do you consider asana and pranayama to be also something you would do as if you were in a Rajasic
I
state?
used to, but they are. I don't think you need to classify it,
Yeah.
but Swamiji did not teach asana and pranayama. Although when he was a young Swami, he did them. So it's a great value. One of my favorite texts is Yoga Vasishtha. One of the things I like about it, it gives equal weight to Raja Yoga and Jnana Yoga. Equal weight. The problem with just doing the Raja Yoga stuff, you can do asana and pranayama, and if you don't do vairagya, renunciation, you don't ultimately do self-inquiry. At best, you're going to get what we call a jada samadhi. Is that a term you've heard before?
No.
Jada means inert. So you may go, get some kind of hyperventilated state. But you open your eyes and you come out and you're still pissed off at everybody and all that kind of stuff. Because you haven't practiced the detachment. And real freedom comes from self-inquiry. And that's where the two paths meet. Yoga Sutra, the second sutra, which is many ways the most famous, Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Is that one you've heard before, Brad?
Yes.
So yoga is Nirodha, the restraining of the chitta, the mind stuff, from forming vrittis, whirlpool-like configurations. Comes from the root vert, which means to turn. We get the word vortex from the same root. So you know what it's like when you're spinning on stuff. So yoga is whatever we do that restrains the mind so that it can be single pointed when you want it to be single pointed. It can just flow when you're in a conversation with people. And it's not turning. How am I doing? Am I okay? What do they think of me? Those rotten sons of bitches. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. That's vrittis. That's what there is to yoga. Now, in all of our scriptures, one of the literary techniques is the rishis, the ones who write this stuff. They'll put the most important ideas first. Is that useful?
Very useful. Thank you.
Now, Ramana Maharshi was once asked, how do I achieve a sattvic mind? This was his answer for that particular student. Who knows what the answer was?
Eat solid food.
What'd you say?
Eat sattvic food.
I thought you said eat solid food. No, eat sattvic food. That helps. Lighten your diet. Lighten your diet. So if you're eating a lot of red meat and you're going through a half bottle of wine every night, could be contributing to a tamasic mind state. All right, next verse.
Jim, I have two questions.
Yes.
Actually. That's okay. they're related to the points you were making earlier. One is, how do you know for someone when you're doing seva that's also not a form of avoidance? I feel like there's some people who avoid their own issues by trying to help other people, and it makes them feel good maybe to help other people, but they're not maybe that's in parts of ways some of the things that they have to work through. That's one question. And the second one, which might be somewhat related, is the mind's virtues, right? On some level, we still have to work through our psychological personality issues, I imagine. And in order to do that, you have to, I don't know if identify is the right word, but when you go to like a therapist, for example, where you do like psychotherapy, you still need to talk about your stories, because a lot of that's just talk
You
therapy.
may and may not, depends on how much suppression you've done in your life.
Right.
So the first one, what's the difference between someone doing seva and someone who's a codependent? I think that's your question.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
A codependent, what the addictive personality versus the codependent personality, both are doing fixing behavior. The addictive personality, when they're uncomfortable, they try to fix it by some external substance or activity. The codependent person is convinced that the cause of their discomfort is other people. If other people would behave and do what I want, then I'd feel okay. You see?
Yeah.
My roommates just don't pick up the house. If I could only get them to do that, then I'd be okay. So I'm going to point it out to them. You know, I'm going to try to control other people. Now, the mark of a codependent is they're angry because the world won't behave. You see that? Or you try to fix the other person and they don't get fixed. In fact, they resent the fact that you're trying to help them. See what I mean?
Yeah.
So you have to understand in yourself that seva is selfless service. I am not doing service in order to control the world so I feel okay.
Can you give an example of that?
Sure. Oh, Jim, I just met the most wonderful fellow. I can't wait to fix him and then he'll be perfect. That's codependence. A whole lot of us do that. There's something wrong with our partner, and so our job is to teach them, to fix them. And we dress it up as I'm encouraging them. I see their potential. Maybe you have relationships like that. That's called codependence, taking a hostage. It's all about your own ego. All real relationship, real love is, this is the way they are right now. You love them the way they are. Now, service, seva, is when you help another person with no thought of return. And it's not what you get from them, either approval or attention or love or anything like that, but I genuinely seek the well-being of the other person. Sometimes all we can do is a ministry of presence, just holding sacred space, just listening to other people without offering our opinions. That make it a little clearer?
Yeah, that makes it very clear. Thanks, Jim.
If you go work in a food line and you're slopping food on someone's plate and they walk away from you and they don't like the food you served, So they throw it on the ground because they don't have the wherewithal even to put it in the trash. Is that going to upset you?
No. That's happened before, actually.
But in our interpersonal relationships, when we try to fix other people, get them not to be reactive and behave in the way where they don't upset us, and then they don't, or break it off, run away, that sort of thing. Now, codependence is a way for us to not be present to our own material. If I totally focus on another person and try to fix them, then I'm not present to what's going on. It's not the same as saving, which is selfless service. Very good question.
That's to a strange follow-up question, which
Okay.
is, in a real partnership, are you always doing save up for your partner? And if that is the case, how do you know, for example, if someone isn't taking advantage of your selfless service to them?
So they take advantage of you. You'll know pretty soon, maybe this isn't the right person for me.
Yes. Okay.
But think, if you have a transactional relationship,
Mhm.
you do me, I'll do you. 50-50 partnership. Okay. But what if you had 100% relationship? So I have that with you. You have nothing I want. And I love you very, very much. You don't need to say, do, spend, bring anything. I love you 100%, not 50%.
But then with that kind of love, you can basically, you don't even need conventional relationship structure. Then you don't even need to be in the presence of the person.
Don't use recipes. Just love.
Exactly.
Just love.
No recipe needed. Yeah.
But the yogi who has a sattvic mind needs nothing from the world. Now, the paradox, if you're giving 100% into the universe, guess what the universe is going to do, even if you don't ask for it? And it sneak up from behind you, shower you with blessings. All right. Next one.
Kritya yaya dharayate mana pranendriya kriya yoge navya vicharinya dhriti sa partha satviki. The unwavering fortitude by which, through yoga, the functions of the mind, the prana, and the senses are restrained, that fortitude, O Partha, is sattvic or pure.
What's the word he's using for fortitude? Drishti?
Yogenavya.
Dhriti.
Dhriti. Yeah.
Driti. Okay. So, read the English one more time for me, please.
Sure. The unwavering fortitude by which, through yoga, the functions of the mind, the prana and the senses are restrained, that fortitude, O Partha, is sattvic.
Yes. So, when Shankara discusses Shama and Dhamma in Viveka Chudamani, we get an insight into this. Shama is when we keep our energy interior, not letting it gush out and just slobber all over the objects of the senses. We turn the mind away from our attachment to the objects of the senses. When he says puna punaha, again and again, how? Through a steady observation of their defects. What do I mean by this? Yoga makes no sense if we don't clearly understand what I call the pleasure principle. What does it feel like to want something you don't have? To want the situation to be different than it is, or wanting to get rid of something you don't like. It sucks. Yoga says there's no other suffering. Yeah, what about if I have a broken leg? Okay, let's just take physical pain, put it on the shelf. That's not why people shoot themselves. That's not why people, shoot other people. So we need to understand and make friends with our suffering. Desire and object of desire become one. For a moment, the mind is freed from its kama, craving, its spriha, longing, its vancha, wanting, its trishna, its thirsting. It's a taste of the bliss of my own self-nature. But in my foolishness, in my ignorance, I have attributed to the object, and I've dug deep habituated grooves in that. So we've been using relationship as an example. So you're lonely. Your mind will tell you, it sucks. I'm suffering because I don't have a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a husband or a wife. Yoga says, no, mudha. What does mudha mean? Fool. You're suffering because you're stuck wanting. Don't dress it up. As Buddha says, like the way most of us live is doing. What's the cause of that suffering? Kama, craving, sangraha, attachment. Noble truth number 3, freedom from craving is freedom from suffering. Most of us get just a little bit by chasing the world. We never say there's not pleasure that we get in the world. It's just so little, and it's so temporary. Noble truth number 4, can I be...
Sorry, I don't have an answer.
Alexa, stop. You can be permanently free from the longing, from the suffering. What the Buddha called the Eightfold Path, we would call it yoga. Why? Because happiness is yourself. So we not only pay attention to our suffering, We pay attention to the satisfaction of desire. You mean a good meal, listening to good music, making love, accomplishing something at work. They do the same thing to my mind. Yes. It will vary in intensity and duration, depending on how badly I wanted it and how successfully I've satisfied that desire. But I get all confused because of diverse sensory experience. I'm too busy paying attention to the objects to really notice what's happening to my mind. Shankara says, at least don't embrace a rotting corpse thinking it's a beautiful bride. Don't dress up your desires. Oh, I want a really perfect relationship, this wonderful person, and that'll make it all better. I deserve it. You know, dress it all up. Dress it all up. No, you're stuck wanting. It's that simple. That's why it hurts. The more you want it, the more painful it is. Yoga says, let it go. They used to say, go of the world, hurry home, body home. This is foundational. Without a clear internalizing of this pleasure principle, then vairagya makes no sense. I feel like I'm suffering. I'm being a goody-goody. I'm giving up all these things. I'm spiritual. Can't you see how I'm suffering? Because I don't have any nice fun in my life. I'm spiritual. Nonsense. The real yogi is the greatest of hedonists. Put up with this. It's so little, the world. So little. Go for something infinite. It's always available. It's endless. No end. Where the bliss of the self. So, our fortitude in yoga comes through insight. And we turn our mind away from the chaos of the sense objects again and again. And we say by a steady observation of their defects. We don't say, well, obviously that was the wrong person, or those was too big. Obviously the wrong person, they didn't come from the right family. That's obviously the wrong person because they had this wrong. They didn't make enough money, or they had this issue. I'm suffering because I'm jonesing. I'm suffering because I have vanja. Buddha. Any thoughts on this? Now, we don't want to be afraid of the world either. The objects of the world are not bad. Vedanta is not about flesh hating. see that the objects of the world are fundamentally shunyata. They're void. All right. Let's do one more.
Jim, can I ask a question?
Please.
I mean, the objects of the world keep changing, right? Like the this, that, who, what, all of that changes. But the jonesing is constant. No. It cannot be constant.
Jonesing, the wanting, is the fruit of spiritual ignorance.
But it's so universal. It's almost like
Such as Maya. Rare are those who have crossed over Maya. But it can be done. Can be done. Shruti says it can be done. The great saints and sages say it can be done. So far, on my own direct experience, it works pretty well.
Jimmy,
Yes.
I have another question. So I know that letting go the attachment to our desires is the way to true happiness. But you have mentioned that we can still have preferences, and we should take actions towards those preferences. But theoretically, it's quite easy to be like, okay, I'm gonna take actions to get this, which is something that I have a preference for, and then I'm gonna let go of the outcome. But it's just really hard to indeed not be hurt when that preference isn't fulfilled.
That's because still your mind hasn't understood where happiness is. Your mind is still telling you that the happiness is in the object, not in what the object does to your mind.
But if I understand it theoretically, is there any way to experientially help my mind understand that?
Yes. First of all, you have to watch. Watch when your mind is in the state of longing. Watch your mind when you satisfy a desire. Don't go unconscious when you satisfy a desire. Pay attention. And then continue to meditate. And if you continue to meditate, by God's grace, you will have at least one experience, all it takes, where you have objectless happiness. Sitting in meditation, maybe in satsang with a teacher, everything will get quiet.
Yeah, I think I've had some of those experiences while meditating, but still my mind forgets, I think.
Yeah, we have to repeat them. But if you have them on even just one occasion, then the same passion that drove your mind into the world will start driving your mind inward towards the infinite.
Okay, thanks, Jimmy.
That becomes the engine of our sadhana. We call it mumukshutva, the burning desire for liberation.
Mm-hmm.
All right, it's 8 o'clock. We'll end here. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om. Sri Guru Pyo Namaha. Hari Om. Thank you all.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Jim.